The morning air in Virginia Beach carried the familiar sound of waves crashing against the shore, but for Sarah Chen, it was the silence between the waves that mattered most. She had learned to find calm in those quiet moments during her 12 years of military service, though few people knew the true extent of what those years had cost her. Sarah stood at her kitchen window, watching joggers pass by on the beach path below her apartment. To them, she probably looked like any other veteran trying to readjust to civilian life. They couldn't see the scars hidden beneath her long sleeves, or know about the nightmares that still woke her at 3 in the morning. What they definitely couldn't know was that for 5 years, she had been one of the most effective snipers in special operations history. The story began in 2018, when Sarah was still Petty Officer First Class Chen, serving as a Navy corpsman attached to various SEAL teams. She had always been exceptional with a rifle, but it wasn't until a mission went sideways in Syria that anyone realized just how exceptional. Her team was pinned down by enemy fire, and their primary sniper had been wounded. Without hesitation, Sarah had taken his rifle and systematically eliminated 7 hostile targets from over 800 meters away, in low-light conditions, while under heavy fire. Commander Jake Morrison, who led that SEAL team, later told investigators that he had never seen anything like it. Sarah's shots were so precise and her movement so fluid that enemy forces couldn't even locate her position. By the time backup arrived, she had already repositioned twice and eliminated 3 more targets. The enemy fighters began calling her the ghost who kills because they never saw her twice in the same place. Within 6 months, Sarah found herself in a classified training program that officially didn't exist. The Navy had realized they had discovered something unprecedented: a female sniper with skills that matched or exceeded their best male operators. However, this created a problem. At that time, women were still officially barred from serving in SEAL teams, and the political implications of having a female sniper operating with special forces were considered too sensitive for public knowledge. The solution was to create a completely off-the-books program. Sarah underwent additional training at a facility in North Carolina that appeared on no official maps. For 6 months, she trained with equipment that was years ahead of anything standard military units used. Her instructors were handpicked from Delta Force and SEAL Team 6, men who had never trained a woman for this type of work but quickly learned to respect her abilities. The training was brutal. Sarah learned to operate completely alone for weeks at a time, living off the land while maintaining peak shooting accuracy. She mastered urban warfare techniques, learning to move through cities like a shadow. Most importantly, she learned to become completely invisible to both enemies and allies. The program's philosophy was simple: if nobody ever sees you, nobody can ever identify you. By early 2019, Sarah was ready for her first official mission, though official was a relative term. She was given a new identity within the special operations community. To most people, she remained Petty Officer Chen, but to a select few in JSOC, Joint Special Operations Command, she became something else entirely. They needed a code name for someone who didn't officially exist, and after her success in Syria, the choice was obvious: Divine Ghost. Her first target was in Afghanistan, a Taliban bomb maker who had been responsible for killing dozens of American soldiers with increasingly sophisticated IEDs. Intelligence had located him in a compound in Helmand Province, but every attempt to capture or eliminate him had failed. He seemed to know exactly when coalition forces were coming and would disappear hours before any raid. Sarah spent 3 weeks getting into position. She traveled alone, disguised as a local aid worker, speaking fluent Pashto that she had learned during her medical training. She established her hide site in the ruins of an old Soviet outpost, nearly 2 kilometers from the target's compound. For 12 days, she observed his patterns, learning his routines, and identifying the perfect moment for the shot. On a Tuesday morning, as the target stepped out to check on his latest bomb project, Sarah took the shot. The bullet traveled for nearly 3 seconds before finding its mark. By the time anyone in the compound realized what had happened, Sarah was already moving to her extraction point. She had planned 3 different escape routes, and she used all of them, changing clothes and transportation methods twice. The remarkable thing wasn't just the successful elimination of the target. It was what happened afterward. Taliban fighters swept the area for days. Looking for the sniper who had killed their bomb maker, they found nothing. No shell casings, no evidence of a hide site, no tracks leading away from any possible shooting position. It was as if the bullet had materialized from thin air. Intelligence intercepts later revealed that Taliban leadership was convinced they had been targeted by some kind of new American secret weapon. They couldn't understand how someone could kill one of their most protected members from such a distance without leaving any trace. Some fighters began to believe they were dealing with supernatural forces. Word of the impossible shot reached JSOC headquarters within hours. The mission had been planned as a test case for the Divine Ghost program. But Sarah's performance exceeded all expectations. Not only had she eliminated the target with a single shot from an extreme distance, but she had done so without compromising the security of any other operations in the area. Commander Morrison, who had been following Sarah's career since that first engagement in Syria, was brought in to oversee her next assignment. He had been skeptical about the program initially, believing that the physical demands and psychological pressure of long-range sniping made it unsuitable for female operators. Sarah's success in Afghanistan forced him to reconsider everything he thought he knew about special operations. The second mission came just 6 weeks later. Intelligence had identified a high-value target in Somalia, an al-Shabaab leader who was coordinating attacks against peacekeeping forces. This target was even more challenging than the first, because he rarely stayed in one place for more than a few hours and traveled with a large security detail. Sarah spent 5 weeks in Somalia, moving between different identities and safe houses. She had learned to become completely unremarkable, blending into local populations so effectively that even trained intelligence officers couldn't spot her. Her ability to appear as just another refugee or aid worker was perhaps even more valuable than her shooting skills. The shot, when it finally came, was made from inside a crowded marketplace. Sarah had positioned herself on the second floor of a tea house, hidden among a group of women having their weekly social gathering. When the target's convoy stopped at a checkpoint just 400 meters away, she had a clear line of sight for exactly 17 seconds. The bullet struck the target through the open window of his vehicle. In the chaos that followed, as security forces tried to identify the shooter, Sarah calmly finished her tea and left with the other women. She was on a boat heading out to sea before anyone even realized a shot had been fired from the marketplace. This second success established a pattern that would define the Divine Ghost program for the next 3 years. Sarah would spend weeks or sometimes months getting into position, becoming so integrated into local environments that she was essentially invisible. Then, when the perfect moment arrived, she would take a single shot and disappear completely. The psychological effect on enemy forces was profound. Taliban, al-Shabaab, and other terrorist organizations began to realize that their leadership was vulnerable in ways they had never imagined. No location seemed safe. No security detail seemed sufficient. The fact that they never found any evidence of the sniper's presence made the threat seem supernatural. Intelligence agencies began intercepting communications where terrorist leaders discussed the American Ghost, or the Invisible Death. Some groups started changing their entire operational procedures, keeping leaders underground for months at a time. The mere knowledge that Divine Ghost was active in their area was enough to disrupt terrorist operations. But the success came at a personal cost that few people understood. Sarah was living a life of complete isolation, spending months at a time in hostile territory, with no backup and no support. She couldn't form relationships because her identity was classified at the highest levels. She couldn't even seek medical attention for injuries without risking exposure of the program. The physical demands were enormous, but the psychological pressure was even greater. Every mission required her to become a different person, speaking different languages and adopting different cultural behaviors. She had to be constantly alert for threats, while maintaining the appearance of being a harmless civilian. One mistake, one moment of inattention, could result in capture, torture, and the exposure of one of America's most classified programs. After 18 successful missions across 4 different countries, Sarah had eliminated some of the most dangerous terrorists in the world. JSOC estimated that her actions had prevented dozens of attacks and saved hundreds of American and Allied lives. But for Sarah, each mission felt like losing another piece of herself. The breaking point came during a mission in Iraq in late 2021. Sarah had been tracking an ISIS commander who was planning a series of suicide attacks against civilian targets. She had spent 2 months in Baghdad, working as a translator for a humanitarian organization while gathering intelligence on her target. The shot itself was routine by Sarah's standards, a 600-meter engagement from the roof of an abandoned building. But as she was preparing to leave her hide site, she discovered that a local family had moved into the building below her position. A young girl, perhaps 8 years old, had been playing in the courtyard throughout the entire operation. The realization that she had been firing over the head of a child shook Sarah in ways that surprised her. She had always been careful to avoid civilian casualties, but the proximity of innocence to her lethal work suddenly felt unbearable. For the first time in her career, she began to question whether the mission was worth the cost. The psychological evaluation that followed every mission revealed the strain Sarah was under. Military psychologists noted increasing signs of isolation and what they termed identity fragmentation, the result of spending years living as different people. The Divine Ghost program had been incredibly successful, but it was destroying the person who made it work. Commander Morrison, who had become something like a father figure to Sarah, made the difficult decision to recommend her for rotation back to conventional duties. He had seen too many special operations soldiers burn out from the pressure, and he recognized the warning signs in Sarah's behavior. But Sarah's story was far from over. The skills she had developed and the enemies she had made during her time as Divine Ghost would continue to shape her life long after the program officially ended. And there were some people in the special operations community who believed that America would need the Divine Ghost again. Whether Sarah was ready or not, the transition back to regular Navy duties should have been a relief for Sarah. But instead, it felt like being caged. After 3 years of operating with complete autonomy, following standard military protocols felt suffocating. She was assigned to Naval Medical Center Portsmouth, where she worked as a senior corpsman in the trauma unit. Her colleagues saw her as a competent but quiet veteran who kept to herself and never talked about her previous assignments. What they couldn't see was how Sarah struggled with the mundane nature of her new life. After years of making split-second decisions that could change the course of international conflicts, helping patients with routine medical issues felt almost insulting to her abilities. She found herself constantly scanning for threats that didn't exist, analyzing sight lines and escape routes in the hospital corridors. The nightmares had started during her last mission in Iraq and only got worse after her return to conventional duties. Sarah would wake up in a cold sweat, seeing the faces of the targets she had eliminated, not because she regretted the kills. Every person she had targeted was responsible for multiple deaths, but because she was beginning to lose track of where Sarah Chen ended and Divine Ghost began. Dr. Maria Santos, the military psychologist assigned to monitor Sarah's transition, quickly recognized the symptoms of what specialists called deep cover syndrome. Operators who spent extended periods living under false identities often struggled to reconnect with their true selves. In Sarah's case, the problem was complicated by the fact that her true identity was still classified. 6 months into her new assignment, Sarah received an unexpected visitor. Commander Morrison appeared at her apartment one evening, wearing civilian clothes and carrying a bottle of wine. To any observer, it looked like a casual visit from an old friend, but Sarah immediately recognized the security protocols in his behavior. Morrison had news that would change everything. Intelligence agencies had identified a new threat that seemed specifically designed to counter the Divine Ghost program. A former Russian Special Forces operator named Viktor Kozlov had been hired by several terrorist organizations to hunt down Western snipers. Kozlov specialized in what the intelligence community called ghost hunting, tracking down operators who thought they were invisible. According to intercepted communications, Kozlov had been specifically tasked with finding and eliminating the mysterious American sniper who had been terrorizing terrorist leadership. He had been analyzing the patterns of Divine Ghost's operations, looking for the signature behaviors that every sniper eventually developed. The fact that no one had ever seen this sniper was actually providing him with valuable information. Kozlov's method was patient and methodical. He would arrive in areas where Divine Ghost had operated and begin interviewing locals, looking for any small detail that seemed out of place. a foreign aid worker who had been in the area at the wrong time, a translator who had asked unusual questions, a refugee who had moved through the area with suspicious efficiency. What made Kozlov particularly dangerous was his understanding of how female operators might behave differently than their male counterparts. While most hunters were looking for the traditional signs of military training, Kozlov was studying the subtle ways that women integrated into local communities. He had identified several patterns in Divine Ghost's operations that suggested the sniper was using feminine social dynamics to achieve invisibility. Morrison explained that JSOC was facing a dilemma. They could continue operating Divine Ghost with Sarah in her current state, risking her capture and the exposure of the entire program. They could end the program permanently, accepting that some high-value targets would remain beyond their reach. Or they could try something that had never been attempted before. The third option involved bringing Sarah back for one final mission, but this time with a complete support network. Instead of operating alone, she would work with a hand-picked team designed to protect her identity while maximizing her effectiveness. It would be the largest investment of resources ever devoted to a single sniper operation. Sarah's initial reaction was to refuse. She had been looking forward to a normal life, maybe even starting a family eventually. The thought of returning to the isolation and psychological pressure of deep cover work made her physically ill. But Morrison presented her with intelligence that changed her perspective entirely. Kozlov wasn't just hunting Divine Ghost for money. His ultimate goal was to capture her alive and use her as a propaganda tool. Terrorist organizations wanted to prove that they could defeat America's most advanced special operations capabilities. A video of Divine Ghost being executed would be worth more than any military victory they could achieve through conventional means. More importantly, Kozlov had already identified 3 other female operators who might potentially be Divine Ghost. These women had no connection to the program, but their profiles matched some of the patterns Kozlov had identified. If Sarah didn't return to finish this, innocent servicewomen would become targets in a hunt that was specifically meant for her. The decision to return wasn't really a decision at all. Sarah had spent her entire military career accepting responsibility for missions that others couldn't complete. The idea that other women might die because of her success as Divine Ghost was unacceptable. The new team assembled around Sarah represented the best that American Special Operations had to offer. Jake Morrison would serve as overall mission commander. Technical Sergeant Maria Rodriguez, an Air Force combat controller, would handle communications and coordinate air support. Sergeant First Class David Kim, a Green Beret with extensive experience in Asia and the Middle East, would serve as Sarah's spotter and backup shooter. Navy SEAL Chief Petty Officer Marcus Williams would handle close protection and extraction planning. What made this team unique was that each member had been briefed on the psychological challenges of supporting a deep cover operator. They understood that Sarah's effectiveness depended on her ability to disappear into local populations, and their job was to provide support without compromising her invisibility. The target for this final mission was Kozlov himself. Intelligence had tracked him to Afghanistan, where he was reportedly close to identifying Divine Ghost's true identity. Sarah would have to eliminate the hunter before he could complete his hunt, but doing so would require her to operate in the most dangerous environment of her career. Afghanistan in 2022 was a chaos of competing forces. The Taliban controlled most of the country, but they were dealing with ongoing resistance from various groups. ISIS-K was launching attacks against Taliban positions while also targeting Western interests. Al-Qaeda was trying to re-establish its presence. Into this chaos, Kozlov was operating with apparent immunity, using his connections with multiple factions to gather intelligence. Sarah spent 6 weeks preparing for the mission, undergoing refresher training in languages and cultural behaviors. But the most important preparation was psychological. Dr. Santos worked with her daily, helping her develop coping mechanisms for the identity fragmentation she had experienced during previous missions. The key insight was that Sarah needed to stop trying to become different people and instead learn to project different aspects of her true personality. Instead of creating fictional characters, she would emphasize different elements of who Sarah Chen really was. This approach would help her maintain psychological stability while still achieving the invisibility she needed. The insertion into Afghanistan was accomplished through Pakistan, where Sarah entered the country as part of a medical relief convoy. Her cover identity was Dr. Sarah Ahmad, a Pakistani-American physician volunteering with an international humanitarian organization. The identity was built on enough truth that she could maintain it under scrutiny while still allowing her the freedom of movement she needed. The rest of the team entered through different routes and established a network of safe houses and communication points. Their challenge was to provide support for Sarah without revealing their presence to the numerous intelligence services operating in the country. Any sign that the humanitarian doctor was connected to American special operations would expose the entire mission. Kozlov had established his base of operations in Mazar I Sharif, the largest city in northern Afghanistan. He was working with a Taliban intelligence unit, while also maintaining contacts with various criminal organizations. His cover story was that he was a Russian businessman interested in Afghanistan's mineral resources, but locals knew to treat him with the respect reserved for someone with connections to dangerous people. Sarah's first challenge was getting close enough to Kozlov to study his behavior patterns. He was cautious in ways that suggested extensive training, varying his routines, and using multiple security measures. More problematically, he seemed to be aware that he might himself become a target. His movements suggested he was actively looking for signs of surveillance. The solution came through Sarah's medical cover. Afghanistan's healthcare system had been devastated by decades of war, and international medical personnel were desperately needed. Sarah established a clinic in a poor neighborhood near Kozlov's area of operations, treating everything from routine infections to war injuries. Within 2 weeks, members of Kozlov's security detail began bringing their families to Sarah's clinic. This gave her the opportunity to study their behavior and learn about their boss's routines. She discovered that Kozlov was methodical, almost to a fault, following patterns that would eventually give her the opening she needed. But Kozlov was also proving to be more dangerous than intelligence had suggested. Through her contacts in the local community, Sarah learned that he had already identified and eliminated 2 other snipers who had been operating in the region. These weren't connected to Divine Ghost, but Kozlov had apparently decided that any Western sniper was worth investigating. More troubling, Sarah began to notice signs that Kozlov might be aware of her presence. Nothing concrete, but small changes in his security procedures that suggested he knew something was different about the new doctor in the neighborhood. He began making inquiries about her background that went beyond casual curiosity. The breakthrough came when Sarah realized that Kozlov was using the same technique that had made Divine Ghost so effective. He was integrating himself into the local community, becoming invisible by becoming unremarkable. The difference was that he was doing it as a predator, using his position to gather intelligence about potential threats. Sarah's opportunity would come during a medical emergency that she would have to create herself. But first, she needed to ensure that when she took the shot, Kozlov's death would look like anything other than the work of a sniper. The mission required her to be more creative and more dangerous than she had ever been before. The stakes couldn't be higher. If she succeeded, the Divine Ghost program could finally end with honor intact. If she failed, every American special operator working under deep cover would become a target for hunters like Kozlov, and Sarah Chen would disappear forever, becoming another casualty in a war that most people didn't even know existed. The plan Sarah developed was unlike anything she had attempted before. Instead of waiting for the perfect sniper shot, she would have to get close enough to Kozlov to eliminate him in a way that appeared accidental. This required her to abandon every tactical advantage that had kept her alive during 3 years of operations, but it was the only way to ensure that his death wouldn't trigger a broader hunt for American operatives. The opportunity came during a cholera outbreak that swept through Mazar-i-Sharif in late September. Sarah's medical clinic became the center of emergency response efforts, and she found herself working 18-hour days treating patients while coordinating with international relief organizations. The chaos of the medical emergency provided the perfect cover for what she needed to do. Kozlov made a crucial mistake during the outbreak. His carefully maintained distance from local affairs broke down when one of his key contacts, a Taliban intelligence officer, fell critically ill. The man's family brought him to Sarah's clinic, and Kozlov accompanied them to ensure his asset received proper treatment. This was the first time Sarah had been in the same room as her target, and the experience was unsettling. Kozlov was smaller than she had expected, with the kind of unremarkable appearance that made him invisible in crowds. but his eyes were constantly moving, analyzing everything and everyone around him. Sarah realized that he was studying her just as carefully as she was studying him. The conversation between them was brief and conducted in broken English, with Sarah maintaining her cover as a Pakistani doctor. Kozlov asked routine questions about his friend's condition, but Sarah could sense him probing for inconsistencies in her story. She had spent weeks preparing for this moment. But being under direct scrutiny from a professional hunter was more nerve-wracking than any sniper shot she had ever taken. Kozlov's friend survived the treatment, but the incident established a connection between him and the clinic. Over the following days, he began making regular visits, ostensibly to check on other patients but actually to continue his assessment of the medical staff. Sarah realized that she was now his primary suspect for being Divine Ghost. The situation became more dangerous when Sarah discovered that Kozlov had begun conducting background checks on her cover identity. Through her team's intelligence network, she learned that he had contacted sources in Pakistan to verify Dr. Sarah Ahmad's credentials. The identity was solid, but sustained investigation would eventually reveal inconsistencies that could expose her. Sarah's window for action was closing rapidly. Within days, maybe hours, Kozlov would have enough information to either rule her out as a suspect or confirm that she was his target. If he confirmed her identity, he wouldn't just kill her. He would capture her alive and use her as proof that he had defeated America's most elite sniper program. The solution required Sarah to take a risk that went against every tactical principle she had learned. She would have to make herself vulnerable to Kozlov in order to get close enough to eliminate him. It was a strategy that depended entirely on her ability to outthink someone who specialized in thinking like his prey. Sarah began by changing her behavior in subtle ways that would make Kozlov more confident about her identity. She started asking questions about security in the area that a genuine doctor might ask, but that also suggested someone with tactical training. She modified her walking patterns slightly to include the kind of situational awareness that special operations personnel couldn't completely suppress. The psychological gamble was that Kozlov's confidence would make him careless if he became certain that Dr. Sarah Ahmad was actually Divine Ghost. He might relax some of his security measures in anticipation of capturing his prize. Sarah was betting her life on the assumption that hunters, like all predators, sometimes made mistakes when they thought their prey was cornered. The trap was set during a medical supply delivery that required Sarah to travel outside the city. Kozlov's intelligence network would tell him that the doctor was planning to be away from the clinic for several hours, providing the perfect opportunity for surveillance or even capture. What they wouldn't know was that Sarah's team had spent weeks preparing for this moment. Sergeant Kim had established an overwatch position that covered the road between the city and the supply depot. Chief Williams was positioned along the route to provide backup if the plan went wrong. Technical Sergeant Rodriguez was monitoring all communications in the area, ready to coordinate emergency extraction if necessary. Commander Morrison was in a forward operating base across the border in Pakistan, ready to authorize military action if the mission compromised American interests. Sarah drove the clinic's aging Land Cruiser along the mountain road, following the route that intelligence predicted Kozlov would use for his ambush. She was wearing body armor under her medical clothing and carrying a concealed sidearm. But her primary weapon was her understanding of how Kozlov thought. The attack came exactly where Sarah had predicted, at a narrow section of road where the hunter would have maximum tactical advantage. Kozlov and two associates blocked the road with their vehicle, while positioning themselves to prevent Sarah from escaping. Their plan was clearly to capture her alive, confirming that they believed she was Divine Ghost. What Kozlov didn't expect was for Dr. Sarah Ahmad to immediately surrender. Sarah stopped her vehicle, raised her hands, and began speaking in rapid Urdu about being a doctor and not understanding why she was being detained. Her performance was so convincing that for a moment, even Kozlov seemed uncertain about whether he had the right target. This moment of uncertainty was what Sarah had been waiting for. As Kozlov approached the vehicle to confirm her identity, she activated a distress beacon that would bring her team running. But more importantly, she began implementing the final phase of her plan. Hidden in her medical bag was a small device that Sergeant Kim had prepared. A GPS tracker connected to a delayed explosive charge. The device was disguised as an insulin pen, part of the medical supplies that any doctor might carry. When Kozlov searched her bag, as she knew he would inadvertently take the tracker with him. The psychological warfare continued as Sarah maintained her cover even under direct interrogation. Kozlov spoke to her in English, Russian, and Arabic, looking for any sign that she understood languages that Dr. Ahmad shouldn't know. He examined her hands for calluses that might suggest weapons training. He studied her eyes for the kind of awareness that marked special operations personnel. Sarah's performance was flawless, because it wasn't entirely a performance. The fear she showed was real. Not fear of death, which she had made peace with years ago, but fear of failure. If Kozlov succeeded in exposing her, every American operator working under deep cover would become vulnerable to similar hunting tactics. The interrogation was interrupted by the sound of vehicles approaching. Kozlov's associates reported that a Taliban patrol was heading toward their position, drawn by reports of armed men stopping traffic on the mountain road. This was actually Sarah's team beginning their rescue operation, but Kozlov couldn't know that. Faced with the choice between continuing his interrogation and avoiding a confrontation with Taliban forces, Kozlov made the decision that Sarah had hoped for. He ordered his team to withdraw, taking some of Sarah's medical supplies as evidence, but leaving her apparently unharmed by the roadside. What Kozlov didn't realize was that he had just activated a countdown that would end his hunt for Divine Ghost permanently. The GPS tracker in his possession allowed Sarah's team to monitor his movements for the next 48 hours. They watched as he returned to his safe house in Mazar-i-Sharif and began preparing reports for his employers about his encounter with the suspicious doctor. The intelligence he was gathering would eventually lead to Sarah's exposure if he was allowed to complete his work. Sarah followed Kozlov back to the city, resuming her medical duties while watching for the right moment to complete her mission. The explosive device she had planted was designed to look like an accident, a faulty piece of electronic equipment that malfunctioned at the wrong moment. When it activated, investigators would find the remains of what appeared to be a counterfeit medical device, possibly purchased from unreliable suppliers. The end came on a Thursday morning as Kozlov was meeting with his Taliban contacts in a tea house near the central bazaar. The explosion was small but precisely placed, causing a fire that engulfed the building where Kozlov was conducting his business. To outside observers, it appeared to be an accident caused by faulty electrical equipment, the kind of infrastructure failure that was common in war-torn Afghanistan. Viktor Kozlov died along with 3 Taliban intelligence officers and 2 civilians who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. The investigation that followed found no evidence of foreign involvement, and the incident was eventually classified as an accidental fire caused by aging electrical systems. Within hours of Kozlov's death, Sarah began her extraction from Afghanistan. She maintained her cover as Dr. Ahmad for another week, ensuring that her departure appeared routine rather than emergency-related. Her team extracted through different routes, leaving no trace of their presence in the country. The mission was officially classified as a complete success. The threat to Divine Ghost had been eliminated, and Sarah's identity remained secure. More importantly, the tactics that Kozlov had been developing to hunt deep cover operatives died with him, ensuring that other American snipers would remain protected. But for Sarah, the victory felt hollow. She had succeeded in eliminating a dangerous enemy, but the cost of doing so had required her to risk the lives of civilians and compromise her medical oath. The woman who had once taken pride in her precision and surgical approach to eliminating threats had been forced to use methods that resulted in collateral damage. The psychological evaluation that followed her return to the United States revealed the full extent of what the Divine Ghost program had cost her. Sarah was suffering from severe identity fragmentation, chronic hypervigilance, and what psychologists termed moral injury, the psychological damage that occurs when someone is forced to act against their deeply held beliefs. Commander Morrison made the decision to officially end the Divine Ghost program. Sarah's success had proven that such operations were possible, but the human cost was too great to sustain. The lessons learned from her missions would be incorporated into future special operations training, but no one else would be asked to carry the burden that Sarah had shouldered for 5 years. Sarah's transition back to civilian life was gradual and carefully managed. She underwent extensive psychological counseling and was eventually assigned to a teaching position at the Navy's medical training facility. Her official military record showed a distinguished career as a corpsman with several classified assignments, but made no mention of Divine Ghost or her work as a sniper. Today, Sarah Chen lives quietly in San Diego, working as a trauma nurse at a civilian hospital. Her colleagues know her as a skilled professional with extensive military experience, but they have no idea that she was once one of the most effective snipers in American military history. The scars from her years as Divine Ghost are invisible but permanent, manifesting in the way she automatically analyzes every room she enters and the nightmares that still wake her several nights a week. The official records of the Divine Ghost program remain classified at the highest levels of government. As far as most of the military establishment knows, the mysterious sniper who terrorized terrorist leadership for 3 years was just another urban legend, a ghost story told by operators who needed to believe that someone was fighting the war better than they ever could. But in certain circles within JSOC, Sarah's legacy lives on. Young snipers learn about precision and invisibility without knowing they're studying the techniques that Divine Ghost pioneered. Female operators receive opportunities that exist because Sarah proved what was possible when someone was willing to pay the ultimate price for their country's security. The enemies who survived Divine Ghost's campaign still speak of her in whispers. In remote camps and safe houses across 3 continents, terrorists tell stories about the invisible American who could kill anyone, anywhere, without ever being seen. They don't know that the ghost has a name, or that she now spends her days saving lives instead of taking them. Sarah Chen continues to serve her country, but now she does it in operating rooms instead of battlefields. She has found a measure of peace in healing rather than killing, though the memories of those 5 years will never completely leave her. Sometimes, when she's working on a particularly difficult trauma case, her surgical precision reminds her of the skills that once made her the most feared sniper in the world. The Divine Ghost program officially never existed, and Sarah Chen was never officially a SEAL sniper. But for those who knew the truth, she remains a legend, proof that sometimes the most ordinary-looking person can be capable of extraordinary things. Her story is a reminder that the price of freedom is often paid by people whose names will never be known and whose sacrifices will never be publicly acknowledged. In the end, Sarah got what she always wanted, to disappear completely. But instead of vanishing into enemy territory, she disappeared into normal life, becoming invisible among the millions of veterans who carry the weight of classified missions and unspoken burdens. She saved her country by becoming someone who officially never existed. And now she saves lives by being exactly who she always was underneath the legend. A healer who happened to be the best sniper of her generation.